Auburn on the road at Alabama. First time in SEC history we're going to have AP number 1 versus AP number 2 in conference play. If you're a fan of the SEC or in college basketball in general, this is definitely going to be a must-see TV type situation tonight. All right, I was trying to find different ways to look at this game, and I thought the best way to do it is just to compare Auburn offensively versus Alabama defensively and how they faced against teams similar. Alabama number 40 in KenPom, so I pulled Auburn offensively against teams in the top 40 defensively in KenPom. As you can see on the screen, Auburn has been fantastic. Nearly 38% from behind the arc, a 55% effective field goal percentage, an offensive rating at 121.5. They've been absolutely insane at home or on the road. Auburn offensively is an absolute juggernaut. Now, Bama defensively, still a really good basketball team, but against top 10 offenses, it's only happened 3 times. Purdue, Houston, and Kentucky, their defense hasn't shown up. Almost a 123 defensive rating. Teams almost shooting 42% from deep. If that defense from Alabama that showed up against Purdue, Houston, and Kentucky shows up tonight, Alabama might get beat by 20. Now, I know people like to see what teams have done on the road compared to at home, so let's take a look at Auburn on the road in SEC games, and I also added their Duke game in there because that's a huge game on their schedule. And again, as you can see, the juggernaut offense, a 122 offensive rating, nearly 53% effective field goal percentage, over 40% from beyond the arc. Really hard to poke holes in anything Auburn does offensively because they continue to show up every night. Now, good news for this Alabama defense. At home in SEC competition and against Creighton, they've shown up. 100 defensive rating, team shooting under 45% as far as effective field goal percentage wise, 26.62% of opponents' three-point percentage. That's damn good. That's definitely going to play, and they're definitely going to need that against a team like Auburn. Now, here's where Auburn doesn't look great. They haven't really been fantastic on the road in SEC play as far as defensively. I added the Duke game in there as well, and their defensive rating really not good. 113.8, that's not really good. Opponents not really shooting the 3-ball well against them on the road in SEC play, shooting 52.62%. Nothing special there, but again, clearly the offense has been carrying Auburn, judging by that defensive rating. Another positive thing for Alabama is offensively at home in SEC competition, and I also added that Creighton game. They've been immaculate. I know that the three-point percentage doesn't look great at 30.67%, but you got to remember Alabama is a team that's very high on variance. So there's times that they're going to look fantastic. There's going to times where they look really, really bad. But at the same time, they only take 3 shots. They shoot threes, they shoot layups, and they shoot free throws. And you can tell by that effective field goal percentage at nearly 55%. They're doing something right if they're not shooting the 3-ball right. They usually can get to the rack. They usually can get to the line. Offensive rating at nearly 116. Clearly, Alabama offensively at home has been extremely good in SEC competition. The issue for me for this Alabama team is the turnovers. Now, Auburn is one of the best teams in the country forcing turnovers and turning teams over. But if you take a look at what this Alabama team is doing over the last 4 games, it's kind of concerning. 15.8 turnovers a game on offense over the last 5 games. And they're not forcing turnovers on offense. Only 9.8 turnovers a game forced over their last 5 on defense. So again, against a team like Auburn, that's going to really be a big deal, because if you take a look at the Auburn offense, they're turning it over less than 9 times a game. And defensively, Auburn turning it over almost 14 times a game, which is a huge difference compared to this Alabama team, almost night and day. Obviously, if Alabama is a favorite in this game, the books are kind of okay with giving us Auburn at plus money as far as right now is concerned. So I wanted to take a look at when Alabama has struggled. They have 3 losses on the year: Purdue, Oregon, and Ole Miss. And there's one thing those 3 teams have in common. They have players that can beat you with post-up players. And you better believe that Auburn has players that can beat you with post-up. It doesn't really matter if it's Jabari Broome. It doesn't really matter if it's Chaney Johnson. It doesn't really matter if it's Dylan Cardwell. All 3 of those guys can play in the post. They can beat you. And as you can see on the screen, when Alabama has faced those teams, they've really struggled defensively. And as you can see on the screen, when they play those teams with post-up players that can beat you, their defense really struggles. The effective field goal percentage is decent, but look at that 3-point percentage. And I think a lot of that has to do with them putting so much effort to stopping what's happening inside. Purdue, Oregon, and Ole Miss each had a guy absolutely go nuclear against Alabama. Trey Kaufman-Renn for Purdue had 26 points, 4 assists, 8 rebounds. Nate Biddle for Oregon had 19 points, 3 assists, 9 rebounds. Malik Dia for Ole Miss had 23 points and 19 19 boards. Can you imagine what Jabari Broom and company is going to do to this Alabama defense if they show up like that? It's going to be an absolute nightmare for Alabama. Now, one thing I did want to point out that I think is kind of big in this game, especially with Auburn being on the road, is that they're sending teams to the free throw line at an alarming rate. 7 games this year with a free throw rate of 35% or higher in the SEC. That's absolutely worse in the SEC. There's no question about that. And that comes into play for me because, like I talked about earlier, we know with Alabama, they only take 3 shots, 3s, layups, and free throws. So if you're getting an Alabama team that's getting constantly sent to the line and possibly the clock being stopped if you're worried about them being behind, you're going to have a really big advantage towards Alabama that's shooting almost 67% from the line at home in SEC play. Alabama's not a really team I worry about at the free throw line. I know their numbers aren't fantastic, but again, at home in SEC play, they've been more than solid. If you're getting a team nearly shooting 70% in college, I know it's 67, but again, nearly 70% from college at home, I'll take that all day long. So definitely a positive for Alabama in that situation. As far as the side is concerned, there's no question for me, I'm taking Auburn. They've been the best team in the country from start to finish, and they've been tested early. They had a semi-away game against Houston that they won. They beat Iowa State. They beat North Carolina. They beat Memphis. They finally lost their first true road game to Duke, but then they rebounded. They beat Purdue in a semi-home game. They've beaten Tennessee. Again, they've just been tested over and over again. Not that Alabama hasn't been tested. Alabama's played a very good schedule as well, but I think this Auburn team prevents so many challenges for Alabama that unless they're just absolutely on fire from deep, I think this game should be about a 10-point win for Auburn. I really, really like Auburn in this spot here.